we're looking at, in this tech talk, CCNA test prep, some things that you guys should be looking into, making sure you guys know about before you actually go through and take the test. So I kind of have a few things that I look for anytime I go through and deal with the CCNA. Obviously, we're going to see that there's a lot of stuff that has changed. They've gotten rid of a lot of things like some of the WAN protocols, like frame relay and stuff like that, and added in some virtualization, some quality of service. Most of the new stuff that they've added to the CCNA is really more of a, and it's all the stuff that is the self-study portion of the CCNA. What I saw on the test, it really seemed like it was kind of high-level stuff, right? Really the idea was that, do you know what it's all about, not necessarily how you go through and configure it, okay? So kind of giving you a couple different things that I certainly would make sure that I know before I go through and take a test, or the CCNA exam, excuse me. So I saw Ospf being a big deal. And not only just how it works, but how to go through and configure that. So again, as you're going through and doing any of the labs or you're playing around with Ospf, make sure you reference not only the command of what it is that you got to put into Ospf to make it work correctly, but also make sure you recognize where it is that you're doing that command as well. When we go and set up Ospf via IPv4 or for IPv6, you can do it either as a network statement in IPv4, or you can go into the physical interface and enable that interface in Ospf. Remember that all Ospf v6, when you're dealing with Ospf v3 for IPv6, that's configured underneath the individual interface. Okay, you're going to see that they kind of discuss a few different things as far as access lists, and one of the big things that they talk about is, as far as the access control list, is how to do things such as network address translation, right? So we're creating an access list to be able to determine who we're going to translate for, and then eventually what will we translate them to. So not only access list, but I would also pay attention on how to configure network address translation is a big deal. Part of this class goes through and does things such as subnetting, virtual variable length subnet masking. One of the things that I saw is that in the older versions of the CCNA was a real big focus. I mean, at one point in time, it was probably a good 60% of the test was how to do that subnetting and making sure that you knew how to do that. And sometimes it'd even be a question that wasn't really subnet related, but you had to go through and do subnetting to figure out what IP address they wanted you to add to an individual interface. Right? So the real question was about, can you log into a router, get into global config, get into an interface and assign an IP address, but what IP address you assign was all based off of what you did for subnetting. From what I've seen, they've really decreased the amount of what we deal with as far as subnetting. The last time I took the test, only one question on subnetting. So I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on subnetting anymore to go through and set that up. Okay, let's see, some of the other things that I know that I would be looking into would be spanning tree. And not just regular spanning tree, but per VLAN spanning tree, rapid spanning tree, right? Knowing the differences of those types. One of the things that they show you is like, is it a standardized protocol or a Cisco proprietary protocol? How many instances of spanning tree do we use? How do we choose things like the root bridge, the root port? Those would be things I would certainly know about within the spanning tree. Knowing how to go through and configure things like a trunk interface. Oops, I don't know how that all of a sudden just got off, but hang on one second. Trunking. Okay, so again, how trunking works and how to go through and configure that trunk interface as well. Right, would be some of the things that I would be looking into. For the most part, I would say if you had these 5 things down pat, you're probably going to be able to pass that test for the most part, okay? So just kind of giving you an idea of what we would be looking for. Now, when I also talk about the idea of test prep, and this is not necessarily just CCNA, but any Cisco test, right? The way I take a test is quite a bit different the way most other people take a test. When you go through and you sit down, you're going to see a couple different types of questions that they're going to ask you. You'll have multiple choice questions, right? There are 4 answers, A, B, C, or D. You select which one is the right answer, quote unquote, okay? You'll have multiple answer. They'll say choose 3 that apply or choose 2, and you have to select 2 that actually match to what they're asking for in the question. And then you'll also have some actual simulator exams as well, where you actually have to go through and make a configuration change on a router and switch. What I've seen on the new CCNA is that it seems as though those simulator questions, few and far between anymore. There used to be at least 2 or 3 for every single test. Last time I took it, I didn't even see a simulation test question on there. Now I know that they're adding more simulations to it, so you're probably going to see a simulator on that. And pay attention to things like time on there as well, okay? When you start looking at the idea of time, we're dealing with 79 questions in 90 minutes. So you really don't have a whole lot of time to be able to spend on each and every single question. If you don't know it, what I always say, when in doubt, see it out, okay? What I mean by that is choose answer C, okay? And go on to the next one. And the only reason I say that is quite commonly the correct answer is answer number C, right? Out of all of them that they look for. Now, obviously, they try and mix that up, but in 9 times out of 10, it's usually somewhere around answer C, okay? So when I'm in doubt, see it out is the way I look for it. Again, when it comes to actually reading the questions, I see a lot of people that spend their time reading the question that's being asked to them, and then looking at the answers to go through and find out which one should be the right answer. I have a real problem with doing that myself, right? Because one of the things that I start doing is when I'm reading the question, I start thinking about the thousands or millions of things that could be potentially the answer that they're looking for on that question. What you need to remember is it's going to be one of the 4 answers. So it seems to me, it helps me out quite a bit, whether it helps you or not. It helps me out to go straight to the answers, okay? Look at the answers that are there, and then go through and read the question. Because now what I'm doing is I'm focusing my answering based off of the 4 answers that I have a choice to pick, rather than the thousands of things that I think that this question could be about, okay? And especially since they kind of ask the question in a somewhat odd way in most case scenarios. Nice to know what it is they're actually trying to see as an answer to begin with, okay? Now sometimes that's not necessarily going to be things that you can do. They might be giving you output of a configuration file, right? And say, oh, is it answer A or answer B or answer C? And you have to look at the output of the configuration file. That doesn't really make sense in most cases to do that, right? But if it's just simply A, B, C, or D, read the answers first and then read the question. So you get kind of an idea of what it is they're looking for, okay? I personally feel that if you're taking more than 2 minutes on any given question, that it's time to go on. Again, make an answer, go on. What you do not want to do, and as a matter of fact anymore, it won't even let you. It won't allow you to go on to the next question if you haven't answered the current question. There is no marking of a question, come back to it later on, right? Once you click on next, you're out of there, okay? That, you might even see that the first question asks you something, the very second question that I ask answers that first question, right? So the idea is that you can't go back once you've gone through and said, let's go on to the next question as well. So make sure you answer every single question and then go on. If you start getting to the end of your time, it's better off to go through and just start clicking answers, okay? So at least you've got every single question answered before that 90 minutes gets done. Let's see, any other questions about taking this test at all, as far as the CCNA is concerned?
Is there any automation?
What do you mean by automation?
There's a section in the e-learning that was about some kind of development kind of questions. Real
like the DNA Center?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Sure. Yeah, and they're adding in DNA Center. It's the whole reason they rewrote the CCNP, as a matter of fact. So yeah, absolutely, automation is going to be on there, but I didn't see a whole lot of real, like, specific test questions, if you will. Right? They said it was more of things like, what product does Cisco have that supports the idea of automation of both assurance and configuration of your devices, right? That's what they were looking for in most case scenarios, just to recognize that you know what DNA Center actually is. But I didn't see any like specific, where do you want to click in DNA Center to make sure configuration change is occurring.
Okay, just really high level.
Absolutely, yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and when I look at these guys, I put them kind of in the order in which I would probably study, okay? I saw a lot more questions on OSPF than I did on any of these other subjects. A lot more questions on access lists than I did on the bottom 3 subjects, right? So it's kind of the order in which I would spend my time in there as well, if you were going through and planning on taking that CCNA exam. How about any other questions? Any other questions about that?
What about network topology?
Well, I saw a couple questions on like CDP, like being able to learn what your quote unquote network topology is using CDP and link layer discovery protocol. But like I said, very minimal. It was really like 1 or 2 offhanded questions that they asked about that. And it wasn't really network topology, it was more about the idea of how do you learn about a directly connected device. And pay attention when they go through and say, what Cisco communication allows us to be able to learn about directly connected devices versus what standard protocol is used, right? There's CDP, which is, as its name implies, is Cisco proprietary, and then there's link layer discovery protocol, which would be a standardized protocol for that. Now, for any of you guys that haven't taken the current CCNA, or the current, what they call CCNA, the class that they're out there, all of this stuff, for the most part, was in ICND 1. If you're used to the old books that they had, the old classes that they had, almost everything was from ICND 1. It was all the new stuff that they added was things like from like the wireless fundamentals. They went through and added in a little bit of quality of service within there. They added in a little bit of virtualization, knowing how virtualization actually works, but none of it is to go through and configure it for the most part. It's really just basic concepts that they want you to understand within there. Any other questions?
The one simulator that you had, what was it on?
So it was configuring port address translation, okay? And what they did is they had 90% of it all configured. They had one command that it needed to go through. IP, NAT, source, and then list one, interface G0/0 overload, right? So the idea is that they had an access list already set up. They had it set with the inside and outside interfaces correctly already. The only thing they didn't have in the configuration was the command to actually do port address translation. And that was the only simulator question that I had.
Okay.
Okay. And when I first took this exam, the new exam, there wasn't even a simulator question on there. So I think that they were just trying to come up with new simulator exam questions prior to the real rollout of the test itself. But I took it on February 24th, right when it first came out, and there wasn't even a simulator on there the first time I took it.
What about IP connectivity? Interpret the components of routing tables, routing protocol.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, they did some of that stuff, but it was almost all OSPF questions.
Okay.
Okay. So how the link state database worked in OSPF, and on things like what route would it choose if I give you these 2 routes to the same destination? What route would be chosen to be put into the routing table, right? But it was all specifically about OSPF. I think I saw one static route, so I probably know things like the administrative distance of a static route, a connected route, and an OSPF learned route.
Okay.
And when that comes into play.
Okay.
Okay. So, and remember, we only look at administrative distance if we've learned the exact same route from 2 different protocols. Okay. If it's not the exact same route, we consider it as different routes, and they both get put into the routing table. And just to kind of clarify that, right? If I've got, say, a static route to the 10.0.0.0/8 network that goes out an individual interface, and then an OSPF learned route to the 10.1.1.0/24. Okay? There are different prefix lengths in this case. Because that is not the exact same route, administrative distance isn't even looked at. It would only be the case if what we learned via OSPF was also a 10.0.0.0/8 network. Now they have to go through and determine which one of these two routes is the best route based off of that administrative distance. Okay, and what I would tell you this, remember that connected routes have an administrative distance of 0. Right? Static routes have an administrative distance of 1. They never asked, but they do show it. EIGRP rows is a cost of 90 for administrative distance, and OSPF has a cost of 110 for that. And judging the trustworthiness or the preference of those routes that we have available for us. Okay, and there's really nothing to that, right? The only thing you can really do is to memorize these numbers for the most part. Any other questions?
Anything about the physical infrastructure connections?
Like physical topology versus logical topology?
No, I was talking more about the WLAN components, AP, WLC, access trunk ports.
So they had it was nothing that I saw, and again, don't get me wrong, it's not like I've seen every single test question in the CCNA by any means, but nothing that I saw was about specific configuration on wireless. It was more just simply about what's the difference between like a standalone access point versus a controller-based access point. Right? And the idea is that a standalone access point, I have to configure the access point individually, versus a controller-based, I make all the configuration changes in the wireless LAN controller. But they didn't really ask anything about like a cap-wap tunnel. They didn't discuss anything as far as like how data goes through, what the service site identifier ID is all about. They didn't mention any of that. I saw a few questions, like maybe 1 or 2 on first hop redundancy protocols. But again, none of it was configuration at all. There's not even a lab in this class about HSRP or VRRP. It was really just simply what is a first hop redundancy protocol, right? The idea of having a redundant default gateway with 1 active, 1 standby type of configuration.
Physical cabling questions?
You know, I didn't see any type of physical cabling questions on there at all, to tell you the truth. Like the difference between, I'm assuming you're talking like a crossover cable versus straight through cable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't see any of those specifications on there at all. Now, again, not to say that you won't, right? And for the most part, I'd tell you that most people really don't even care about that. They're going out and they're buying their cables from somebody else that makes them, and then they're just setting everything up to be auto-negotiate both speed and duplex. So it relies on things like auto MDIX to recognize whether or not it should be a crossover or straight through cable. So it's really not much of an issue anymore, so you really don't see most people even asking questions about it. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Should we try to memorize?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Should we try to memorize the port numbers? Telnet, SSH?
Well, I'll tell you. Hang on 1 second. Let me actually find the slide for you here. There is one spot, and I don't know if I'd necessarily say that you have to actually memorize it per se. This page right here. I'm not even sure what it is in the book, to tell you the truth. But they talk about the application layer. And the only reason that I would tell you this is that, again, it has to do with an access list, right? Where in the access list, they may have you build an access list or say what command would permit telnet traffic through that network, right? In which case you'd have to know that telnet uses TCP port number 23 as a destination port number at that point, okay? But The only applications I've ever seen them on any of the CCNA tests would be these applications that they show right here, okay? So know that things like file transport protocol uses TCP port 21, SSH uses TCP port 22, Telnet is TCP port 23. For the most part, that's what I see, and then there's HTTPS, you will see that every once in a while. Now, don't forget, however, in an access list, you can actually go through, instead of saying EQ80 as the destination port number, you can actually type in EQ dub 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 as well, right? Forget about what the port number is HTTP traffic anyway. But yeah, I would definitely say, if you're gonna memorize port numbers, I wouldn't worry about anything other than these port numbers.
Which for the FTP, SSH, Telnet,
Yeah.
and
I'd probably memorize all of these just in case. Okay. But from what I've seen on the test, they really kind of do a lot of, because for testing purposes, a lot of it's going to be about Telnet and HTTP. And the only reason for that is on their simulators, it's a router simulation, right, that they're testing. Even if it's quote unquote a server, that's really a router virtual machine that they're dealing with. So the really only things that we can test would be things like SSH, Telnet, and web traffic, right? I can browse to that device for the GUI interface that we can reach on the routers or switches that are out there. Right? So you could build an access list and then you can test it with another router if you wanted to. And so, like I said, for the most part, it's just SSH, Telnet, and HTTP is what I would really memorize. The other ones you might see, but I didn't see them. It's really about Telnet and HTTP for the most part.
So for the multiple choice questions, there was normally like 4 answers.
Yep.
Okay, and then maybe 1 or 2 of the answers are just far-fetched answers.
Yeah. So if you know, I don't know if I should really say this, but I'll do it in you, whatever. So if you know much about how Cisco actually has them create the test. Okay, one of the things you have to remember is the people that write the test questions, a lot of times they don't even know anything about Cisco and the command line interface. What they're doing is they're looking at the CCNA book and saying, this is what it says in this book, let's make a test question for that, okay? When you look at those multiple choice, there's always gonna be one that's the right answer, one that is what they call a distractor. It's somewhere close, but there's something about that answer that makes it wrong. Then there's something that's completely far-fetched, nowhere close to what they're looking for as far as a question is concerned. Right? And then the other one itself is usually something wrong with the answer itself. Okay, so that, like for instance, they're asking about an IPv4 question and is talking about IPv6 as the answer. And honestly, once you start realizing that that's the case, that there are always 2 that are kind of way off, and then there are 2 that are one right, the other one's really close. You can kind of narrow those down to say, well, it's one of these 2. What's wrong with one of these 2 answers? Mm-hmm. What is the most correct is what I look for. Right? And again, remembering at all times, this isn't a Russell Hughes test. It has nothing to do with what I say and how I teach the class. It's a Cisco test. It's about what Cisco puts in those books. And if you have the courseware for this, right, pay attention to the little notes in that courseware. Hang on a second. Let me bring up my Cisco e-reader here, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Here you go. All right. So they're giving you information about what's going on within the class, but then they're giving me this little note. This figure depicts an example. Pay attention to these little notes right here. Right? This one's not the greatest example because I can't see how they would actually come up with a test question for it, but they love asking test questions on these little informational notes that are in that book as well, okay? And usually those are gonna be just like one of those multiple choice. I see a lot of people when they go through and they read these books, they're reading all the information, they skip over these little informational notes within here, okay? I would make sure I read those and know what's going on within those.
I was looking at one study guide, and it was saying, it was giving areas to focus on, and it was saying that the network access was 20%. Network fundamentals was 20%. IT connectivity was 25%, and security fundamentals was 15%.
I'd say take that with a grain of salt.
Okay.
Okay. It might be the little breakdown of what Cisco gives you as far as the percentage of what you got right, but what that actually means, like Ethernet or fundamentals, networking fundamentals. What do they mean by that? Well, they're talking about things like spanning tree, they're talking about routing, they're talking about subnetting, they're talking about how switching actually operates, the whole encapsulation, de-encapsulation process, right? So there's a lot to that network fundamentals that you're looking at there. And when they say security, are they talking about the specific security sections, or are they talking about the idea of going through and putting on a network banner and setting an enable password, an enable secret password, right? Most of the security questions that I saw were pretty basic. How do you go through and add in an enable password? How do you make sure someone has to log in with a username and password? How do you set up SSH? By the way, probably know how to set up SSH.
Yeah. I mean, as far as security, it was like define key security concepts, threats, vulnerabilities, exploits, describe security program elements.
Now, I would suggest if you don't necessarily know a whole lot about that, tomorrow morning, starting at 9 o'clock, I'm going through those 2 security sections that are part of that CCNA as well. I didn't see a whole lot of questions on it. Let me just tell you that.
Okay.
But again, your results may vary, right?
So the new version of the CCNA, it came out in February?
February 24th was when you could first take that test, yep.
Okay.
Obviously, that all changed pretty quickly after that when we started having this COVID outbreak, and so they, like for instance, they shut down all of the testing centers, and you couldn't take that test for a while, and now you can go through and you can do it online, so you can do it from your house now rather than going into a Prometric testing center. So be careful with that, though. I will have to say, right? You want to make sure that it is as quiet as possible. If you're taking the test from home, they go through and they say, if they think there's somebody that's off screen that's handing you answers and they hear something, they'll just fail you right away. So I'd say be very careful about taking that at home. When I read some of the rules, I was thinking to myself, I don't even want to do that in the office because there's too much noise that can potentially be seen as someone trying to cheat. Right? Because they're using things like your web camera to verify that you're not looking things up in a book, that you're actually there, you're not looking over to another computer or something like that. So I think that I would be pretty careful about taking my CCNA exam online from home.
So, I mean,
But honestly, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna ask, so you can still go in person and do it?
Not yet.
Okay.
I think that like Sunset Learning, we're going to be opening our doors for testing in a like half capacity on June 1st. So that's kind of a ways away when you start looking at it that way. And you know, when it comes to the CCNA and any of the stuff that you've learned, if you don't use it, you lose it type of situation, right? So you don't want to wait too long to actually go through and take the test after you've gone through and done all your studying for it.
Yeah, because I was taking the class with you earlier, and I was studying for it, and then COVID happened. So use it or lose it.
Yep. So are you part of Sunset Next, the Next community at all?
No, not. I don't think so.
Okay. So what you might want to look into is the idea of someone actually joining next, because you'll get a year's access to all of our video resource library that we got. So like, for instance, that CCNA that you went through, I recorded that whole thing, and it's online now. So you guys can go through and watch the entire class all over again if you needed to.
It's good to know.
Yeah. Well, unless there are any other questions, that's pretty much all I really have for you guys as far as test prep is concerned. So, like I said, I guess I should throw out a couple different things. If you're looking for like practice test questions, they're not going to be exactly what you're going to see on the test, but I think that Boson does a really good job with their test questions. That's BOSON. If you go to boson.com, they've got a lot of really good stuff out there. In my opinion, some of the best test prep that's out there. Someone just sent me a question. Hang on one second. Okay, so Joe K is telling me that I'm muted. Did anyone else see I'm muted? You guys can hear me just fine, right?
Yeah, I hear you.
Huh. Well, let me just answer him here real quick.
That was from the very beginning.
All right. Did I just get that now?
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Well, sorry about that, Joe.
But what you were saying from the very beginning, that those 5 elements, those are the 5 major elements that we should focus on.
I would really make sure I know these 5 elements like the back of my hand before going through and taking that test.
Okay.
I saw out of the bulk of the test, these 5 things. And like I said, kind of in this order as well. I saw more OSPF than I saw access lists, more access lists than I saw NAT, more NAT than I saw spanning tree, so on and so forth. And then everything else was kind of miscellaneous. I'll bet that this was a good 60 or 70% of the test, somewhere close to that.
Do they still have the matching exercises that they had in the older tests? You'd be given 3 to 6 items, and you'd have to categorize them.
Well, I didn't see anything like that. Again, not saying you're not going to see it, but I do remember, like in the old CCNA, they had things like the OSI model and the TCP/IP protocol stack, and you had a drag and drop type of thing.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't see any of that, but obviously could always be thrown back in there. How about any questions from anybody else?
Hi. Does the new test comes with the lab exercises or just only questions?
You're talking about the Boson stuff that I was discussing? Or the actual CCNA exam?
The actual CCNA one.
Yeah, so when I first took it on February 24th, there were no labs in there. So there's nothing where you actually had to jump on a router or switch and make a configuration change. The last time I took it, there was one simulator exam, one test question that had that kind of thing, where you had to log into a router and set something up. Okay. Now the older exams had 2 or 3 of those, but I only saw one of them the last time I took the exam. And I know that they kind of made a couple changes for those as well, right? Like you used to be able to use a question mark. From what I've seen now, the question mark doesn't work. Keyboard completion doesn't work. Whether or not they add that stuff back into those, I have no idea whether or not they're going to do that either.
Do you think the old one was harder?
Yep.
Yeah.
I certainly do. Well, the old CCNA exam was 2 courses. It was the ICND 1 and the ICND 2, right? So you either took 2 separate tests or one combined CCNA that had questions from both classes. Now the new CCNA is basically the old ICND 1 plus a couple extra sections, which are all the self-study sections in the new CCNA.
And subnets drive me crazy. So.
Yeah. Hey, you know, and jump out on YouTube, okay? If you guys want to go through and play around with it, look for Sunset Learning, Subnetting Made Easy on YouTube. And I recorded the whole spiel on how to do subnetting there. And I go through multiple examples over and over and over again. Should be plenty for what you need to be able to go through. And like I said, I think I only saw one subnetting question at all on the whole exam, both times I took it. So a lot less focus for that subnetting, which I think is a good thing, right? Because in my opinion, as a CCNA, I'm not the man to be the one that would do the subnetting, right? Whoever does the design does the subnetting. What they're going to tell me is go put this IP address and subnet mask on this interface.
This is my first Cisco test.
Yeah. You've never taken a Cisco exam before, Dwayne?
No.
Gotcha. Well, then you're in for a surprise. But I will have to say, I think that the questions that they ask in this new version of the CCNA, they weren't like the old one. I think the old exam was really kind of almost trying to, I don't even know how to put it, trying to fool you to pick some other answer, right? I thought this was much more straightforward as a test. The questions themselves were not really misleading, if you will.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've taken Microsoft tests, and I just take those questions that, what you just said, are very misleading and try and fool you.
Yep. Trying to make you think about some other technology when it's something easy, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and that's kind of what the old CCNA exam was kind of like. I did not see that these last few times on this new exam. It seemed like they're much more straightforward. Hey, I want to know whether or not you know it. So there weren't a whole lot of double negative questions, right?
Yeah.
I really dislike the, which one of these is not true, okay? Why don't you just say which one of these is false? Anything else from you guys? Savannah, you got any questions at all?
Yes.
Go for it.
This 60% that we have to focus on OSPF, LCL, ACL, not in the spanning tree versions. This for the new exam, and this new exam doesn't include the new topics about automatization and programming.
So they do have some information about automation and programming, but again, what I saw for the questions were not how to configure DNA Center. It was really just, do you know what DNA Center is and what we're trying to get out of it? The idea of intent-based networking. All right, and you're also asking, does every test have 79 questions on it? You know, it's kind of generally right around 79 questions. Not every test is 79 questions. The CCNA will be 79 questions, okay? What I mean by that is like the EN core, not necessarily all 79 questions, although they're very close. They're always really close to right around 79 questions.
When do you know if you pass or fail? Right away?
Right away.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, so when you get done, it goes through and it calculates it and it'll print it out right away, give you information about whether or not you passed or failed. And they also break it down, like you mentioned earlier, that the 25% on this and 25% on this and 10% on this, they break it out into like 5 or 6 different sections that tells you like a percentage of what you did on those 5 sections. And like I said, not real good detail on that, right? When they say, hey, you did 67% on network fundamentals, it's not telling you what answers you got right or wrong, right? And doesn't even really tell you what quote unquote network fundamentals is. But you certainly know right away whether or not you passed or failed. All right, well, if there are no more questions, then I'll let you guys go. And you're absolutely welcome, all of you guys. Thanks for coming in here.